And welcome to Beacon Hill Update with Senator Jason Lewis, our state senator from the 5th Middlesex District. Good morning.
Good morning, Mary Beth. Great to be with you.
Nice to see you again too, Jason. My name is Mary Beth McAteer Margolis. I'm the Community Outreach Director here at MMTV, a retired city councilor in the city of Melrose, having worked with Senator Lewis on many projects over the years. And this is on Main Street. We're glad to have you with us today, and we have lots to talk about, don't we, Senator?
We sure do.
You have been very busy, and we're glad that you're here back at MMTV Studios in Melrose, and happy to share this with the other stations in our district. So tell us what's been happening on the legislative side. You've been in our state senator, since 2014.
Yes.
Melrose, Winchester, Stoneham, Reading.
Right, Wakefield and Malden.
Yeah,
yes.
Great. So
Yes.
inner communities, lots of happenings, development, infrastructure, lots of things that have been happening. You're the co-chair of, let me see, get this right. You're the chair of the Joint Committee on Education, which has always been a topic that I've been interested in, and the assistant chair of the Ways and Means Committee.
Yes. That's our budget committee.
Your budget committee, so you know where all the money is,
Right.
right? And where it's going. You have co-founded a number of different coalitions, including a health coalition, the Fells, and Zero Waste. So lots of climate issues and mental health issues, and many things that you have been able to be very effective on this year. So let's tell you take it away and tell us what you've been doing.
Sure. Well, it's never a dull moment
Right.
in the state legislature or in our communities. Lots always happening. Very active. I guess where I might start is, we just had the state primary election a couple weeks ago, and of course now we're looking forward to the general election in November. And just want to make sure everyone knows that we've passed a new law back just a few months ago. The state legislature passed the law. Governor Baker signed it.
Votes
and
Act.
The Votes Act,
Vote
exactly,
Act, right?
yes. And it's really all about making it easier and more convenient for everybody, all registered voters, to cast their ballots in all of our elections, municipal, state, and federal.
Right.
It's been very distressing, I know it has been for me, I'm sure for you and many others, to see some states in the country trying to roll back voting rights, make it more difficult for people to cast their ballots. Invariably, that affects disproportionately young people, seniors, people with mobility issues, low-income people, people of color. Well, here in Massachusetts, we're trying to do just the opposite.
Right.
We're trying to make sure that the voting franchise is available to everyone. So what we did in this bill is we now have made it permanent in all of our elections that you can vote by mail. Right. So you know how before you had to have an excuse to vote by mail?
Right.
No, now anybody can vote by mail if that's more convenient for them. And they can either return the ballot through the mail, or you can put it in one of those drop boxes.
Right.
And
We have one in Melrose.
And those are safe and secure. So that's now going to be permanent.
Right.
And the other thing we did in the bill, the major thing, is to also make sure that we would have early in-person voting in all of our communities. So, for example, for the election coming up in November, our town and city clerks will have to provide 2 weeks of early in-person voting. Typically that takes place in town or city hall, and it has to include at least one weekend day.
Right.
So again, give people more options to vote. And of course you can always vote on election day.
Of course.
It's typically when I prefer to vote.
Right.
But now, so to summarize, you'll be able to vote early by mail, early in person, or on election day. And so we're hoping this will increase participation in our democracy.
And just to give people a little more information about how to vote by mail, you have to had requested a ballot, correct?
Yes, we don't automatically mail ballots. So there was a postcard that everybody received from the Secretary of State, and then you just say, yes, I want a ballot, for the primary election or the general. If you didn't do that, you can still go ahead and request it. I think you can go online on the Secretary of State's website. And I think if you contacted City Hall or Town Hall, you can also do it that way.
Right. So there's lots of options. And just to remind everyone, Election Day is November 8th. If you want to vote in person or get your ballot in before that. November 8th is the day, and of course, Senator Lewis is on the ballot again this year. So thank you for stepping
bet.
up
You
and
bet. And we should-
continuing to be willing to serve.
Thank you. And we should probably add that those who do want to vote by mail, the ballots are going to be starting to be available in early October.
Right.
So,
they'll be
fairly soon.
sent out to you.
Yes,
Soon.
right.
Right. I know I got mine already.
Okay.
Well, I got mine for the primaries early,
Yes.
and then I'm expecting the other one very soon. So some of the other topics and areas that you've been really instrumental in working on, we know Roe versus Wade has become a huge issue this summer, nationally. And Massachusetts has always had, or for many years,
Yeah.
has had a more progressive approach. However, we wanted to sort of codify that and make sure that people had access. So tell us a little bit about what you and the legislature have done to ensure that for our constituents.
Sure, yeah. So just taking one step back, I would start the conversation by saying that I strongly believe that access to health care should be a basic human right. And so everybody, regardless of their economic circumstances, should be able to get the care they need. And that's kind of how I approach this issue. And for me, reproductive health care, the full spectrum of care, including access to abortion, is part of that, is part of healthcare services. And I'm very proud that we do live in a state, Massachusetts, that recognizes that and believes that people should be able to make their own decisions about what's best for them and their family, and that the government shouldn't be restricting that right. I mean, we've always had that position, well, in recent decades,
Right.
but I never did I think any of us expect that Roe v. Wade, which has stood since 1972, is well accepted, that would completely be struck down by the Supreme Court. That was pretty shocking.
And now there is talk that there could be a national ban. So
I mean, if
we
Republicans control Congress,
Right,
and if they were to take over the presidency, I'm sure they would push for
Right.
that. So that's very scary prospect. So what we're at least doing in Massachusetts, and we actually passed two laws.
Okay.
One was prior to Roe v. Wade being overturned because we were nervous about what might happen. So we passed, back in late 2020, we passed something called the Roe Act.
Right.
Basically, that just made it clear in the Massachusetts law that access to reproductive care, including abortion, is fully protected and legal in our state.
Okay.
So if anything were to happen to Roe v. Wade,
Nationally.
nothing would change in Massachusetts. So that was already in place. Then when the Roe v. Wade was overturned, what's happened is some other states that are typically led by pretty conservative Republicans are looking to not only just restrict or even completely ban abortion, shockingly even in cases of rape or incest,
Right.
but they're trying to criminalize patients, providers and patients who
Right.
are seeking care either in that state or trying to go out of state. So
Right.
we passed a new law, and this was very bipartisan. We worked with Governor Baker on this, to protect our healthcare providers and patients so that they would have liability protection against lawsuits, and that would apply to providers, whether it's Planned Parenthood or any other provider, and
see.
also patients that come here from other states.
Other states, right.
That's right.
Right,
So that's
right.
something we did, and we got that done in late July.
One of the other components of that bill, as I recall, is access to gender-affirming care. So as you know, as we're concerned about, that there is some states that are denying that. And so tell us what Massachusetts has done for that.
Yes, that's exactly right. So some states, those that are typically led by conservative Republicans, are also trying to take away access to care for people who are transgender and are transitioning. This bill that protects access to reproductive care and abortion care also will protect access to gender-affirming health care in Massachusetts as well.
And are both of those pieces of legislation, is it extended to state like universities and colleges, or is it more just in terms of the public, or what?
So it covers, everybody in the
Okay.
state, all of our healthcare providers, all patients, again, whether they're in-state or come from other states to seek the care that they need here.
Right.
But what we also did in the bill that I was very excited about is I at the beginning of the legislative session last January, I worked with a state representative named Lindsay Sabadosa, who's from Western Mass.
Okay.
And I worked with Reproductive Equity Now, which used to be called NARAL, and Planned Parenthood. And we wrote legislation that will make it more easier for college students we focused it on our public colleges and universities, to access medication abortion services.
I see.
So medication abortion, it's 2 different pills that you get prescribed. It's very convenient, very safe, and it's very effective in the early stages of a pregnancy. That demographic, sort of college-age women, is the demographic where we see the highest incidence of unintended pregnancies. So being able to make sure those students have access either on campus at the health clinic or that they get referred to a local provider is very important to them being able to continue their studies, and was a priority for a lot of our reproductive rights advocates. So that provision to do that was included in the bill. Yes.
That's an important piece of it, I'm sure.
Yes.
Particularly in view of the depression and anxiety and the mental health issues that we've seen in our younger people.
Yes.
Partly, COVID and just in general in the situation around the world. So you have been a big advocate for mental health care and have included many major, I think you were just instrumental in helping pass a major mental health care bill. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because, again, it goes back to this basic premise that, I believe, as I know many people do, that healthcare should be viewed as a human right.
And
certainly
for mental health.
And well, that's been the problem, right? For a long time, we often view physical health, whether it's you have a heart attack, you need treatment, or treatment for diabetes, or obviously you break your leg, or God forbid, cancer. All of those things we recognize people deserve access to care. We have a world-class healthcare system. Almost everybody in Massachusetts has insurance coverage, although we still could do better. But unfortunately, the same has not been true for access to mental health care.
Right.
And we're really talking here about mental health in terms of clinical anxiety, depression, PTSD, schizophrenia, but also we're talking about addiction. That comes under the same,
substance abuse.
Substance abuse, right. So all of that's under kind of behavioral health. So even though we actually have a state law that says that we have to have mental health parity, which means that insurers have to sort of reimburse for mental health care the same way they would for physical health care. Healthcare providers have to. We haven't. That's not what's happening in practice.
Okay.
And we haven't been enforcing that law strongly enough. So what happens is people who need access to mental health care, which is extremely common, and it's been a major crisis among our young people, and at the
especially
pandemic
the last
made it
2
worse,
years,
right? People are finding that they can't find a provider.
Right.
It takes months to be on a
an
wait list, to
appointment.
get an appointment.
Yep.
Maybe they get an appointment and they don't take insurance, so you now have to somehow pay out of pocket, which a lot of people can't afford.
Right.
It can be very inconvenient. We've got a major problem with people boarding in emergency rooms, which means they go to a hospital emergency room because they need mental health care, they're having a crisis, and there's no bed for them to be placed in, so they ended up staying in the this is happening right now in the emergency room.
Particularly with young people and young adults.
Yes, and pediatrics. So what we did was, we've been working on this for a long time. Actually, the state senate, it's a very high priority for the state senate president. She's had a history of mental health, mental illness in her family.
Right.
So we got the bill through the Senate. The House of Representatives, Representative Lippert-Garabedian, and it was very helpful as well. We got this through there and onto the governor's desk. And it's a major step forward. It's going to do a lot of things. It's going to provide, insurers will have to cover an annual mental wellness checkup, just like we do your annual physical.
Yep.
So if you want to seek one, you'll be able to. It's going to address the emergency room boarding crisis in a number of different ways. It provides more tools to our state to enforce mental health parity, to make sure that we are providing that care. There's a lot in the bill to also increase the number of, support more people going into the mental health field. Because part of it is we have a shortage.
Extreme shortage of providers and clinicians.
And clinicians and therapists. So this bill is going to provide a lot of grants. It's going to provide some loan forgiveness programs and scholarships and various ways to help more people, go into the field.
Is there funding for facilities that offer additional beds or programming, that type of thing?
There is,
Good.
and I'm glad you asked that because it actually is very relevant to our district, our communities. One of the exciting projects that was announced recently by Melrose Wakefield Healthcare, which is, as you know, part of Tufts Medicine, is to convert the old Malden Hospital site, which has sat vacant for 20 years, into a state-of-the-art mental health hospital. And it's going to serve all ages, all the way from pediatric to geriatric. And it's a fantastic proposal. I think that it's going to be 160 beds, something like that.
It's just getting off the ground.
Just getting off the ground, The Tufts Medicine has just presented the proposal. It's gotten a lot of support from local leaders. It's getting a lot of support from the community. The reason it's so supported is because the community understands we need more health care. But the other thing that is part of the project is the rest of that site is going to be protected as open space conservation land. And the community will have access to it as a park, and they'll have input into how it's going to get where the trails will be, how it will get utilized. So it's a really great innovative proposal. And Tufts is obviously putting significant funding into it. They've partnered with a specialized mental health provider, Acadia, and we've also are working to get some state funding to help with the demolition and remediation of the site.
I know the city of Malden has struggled with that for a long time. That's that particular location and what was going to happen, and it seems like because it was originally the old Malden Hospital, that it's only proper and fitting that it would continue a mission like that. So
that's exactly right.
I'm happy also to let you know, in case you don't know, that the City of Melrose is going to be offering free mental health care training for community members, for young adults and for regular adults. And you'll be hearing more about that in the next couple of weeks. They're going to do a couple of training sessions, just so that people and family members, teachers, providers have an awareness of these issues and what they can do to help an individual.
And that's so great because a lot of this is reducing stigma. A lot of the reason, unfortunately, some people still don't seek help is because of stigma. And we need to break that down. And this is something that.
And then when we even make it more difficult, when we get beyond the stigma, and you begin to say, okay, let's find you some care, and then you can't find care. It's even more challenging to address it. So thank you for your work on that.
Absolutely, it's a great team effort. And let me give a shout out while we're on this topic to our police departments. Many of the police departments in this area have been doing a great job understanding that so many of the times that they get called in emergency situations, somebody is having a mental health crisis, and so you want to prevent that situation from escalating, and so many of our police departments are using mental health counselors, therapists, who will even accompany police officers.
I think Melrose and Wakefield actually have a shared provider that is on the force. To do that.
And they've been expanding that kind of access, and that's been a really good initiative, I think, because that prevents situations from becoming, potentially becoming violent.
So one of the big things, I think, with mental health and all of these issues is education and educating the public. And in your role as the chair, you have really done tremendous work with certainly from the Student Opportunity Act in 2019. And that is finally, I understand, going into, well, it's been in practice.
Well, it's such a big investment. I mean, it's basically about $1.5 billion of new funding for our public schools. So we didn't have the capacity to implement it in 1 year. So we're sort of phasing it in. So tell us about what else you've been working on in that, along with that, and in light of COVID, and
everything else that's gone on in
Yeah.
the schools and in education the past couple of years.
Yeah, so it's been, obviously the pandemic's had a big impact on all of our lives and upended so many, the way we work, and it's impacted many of our businesses. It has had a particularly devastating impact on our schools, unfortunately. We are now starting to see some of the data on what's happened to students because of remote learning, and we've seen a major backslide, in students' basic skills, reading, math, and unfortunately, again, as is often the case with education issues, it's disproportionately impacting students that were already vulnerable, students that are English learners, that have special needs, that are from disadvantaged backgrounds, students of color. So those gaps which have existed before the pandemic have gotten worse. So we are very aware of that, and there's a lot of hard work going on, in our school districts to provide, extra services, high-impact tutoring, more after-school programming, acceleration academies. And the good news is there's a lot of funding. There's both the Student Opportunity Act, which is the state law we passed, which is providing more funding to districts. There's also, Congress really stepped up and provided a lot of pandemic relief directly to schools. And that money is available for a few years. So that's good. The difficulty that a lot of our schools are facing is the same thing that a lot of businesses are facing, is a workforce shortage. And
escalating
hiring.
costs.
Costs are also a challenge. That's particularly true with building new schools. But also with operating schools. But the bigger challenge for them has been finding, hiring enough special education teachers, English learners. So we are looking at ways to try to increase the pipeline. We're also looking at ways to try to diversify, because, about 40% of our students are students of color now in Massachusetts. Less than 10% of our teachers are of color. And there's a lot of research that shows the beneficial impact on all students on having a diverse workforce. So we've got some programs we are, really trying to push to do that. So those are all some areas we're focused on. School nutrition is another one. One good silver lining that came out of the pandemic was universal school lunch and breakfast. So all students have access. Unfortunately, that ended at the beginning of this school year, but in Massachusetts, in our state budget, we provided funding to continue universal school meals at least for another year. So all of our schools are able to continue providing free breakfast and lunch,
No applications, no criteria.
No students, families being hounded for meal debt. No shaming of students or stigma because one student, is getting free lunch and so on. So we're looking at how to maybe try to make that permanent. Maine has done that, and California has done that. So it's a challenge because it's expensive. But we're looking at ways to try to do that, because we want to make sure that all students have a healthy, nutritious, both breakfast, if they want in school, and lunch, because how can you expect a child to learn and thrive if they're hungry?
One of the things I've been seeing around town is lawn signs for the Fair Share Act, the Fair Share bill, which is a ballot question, and so you don't really have any control over that, except if you wanted to speak to it. It's a tax. $1 million plus, and I think half of the funding, if it were to pass, would go to education, and half would go to transportation. So in light of the issues in education that we've just talked about, and we're going to get to transportation, give us a little spin on what that is.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. It's called the Fair Share Amendment, or sometimes referred to as the Millionaires tax. It originated in the legislature. I'm actually the lead Senate sponsor. So I've spoken. It had to actually get passed in the state legislature multiple times
to go on the ballot. It was on the ballot before, was it not?
Well, it was headed to the ballot in 2018.
Oh, right, yeah.
But unfortunately, the opponents got it tossed off the ballot by the Supreme Judicial Court on a technicality. I then refiled it as a legislator. I filed it as a bill, and it's essentially the exact same proposal. And that technicality no longer applies. So that's why voters will get, your chance to weigh in on this in November. But basically what it is, it would, right now we have a 5% personal income tax in Massachusetts. Our rate's actually a lot lower than many other of our peer states, which typically have graduated rates, and they'll have a rate at some states as high as 10, 12% for the highest earners. So all this would do is if you earn more than $1 million a year in an annual year as a household, and that's income, not wealth, it's not the value of your house or your business, just income, you would pay an additional 4% income tax only on the amount above $1 million
over $1 million. Right.
And that money that you would pay to the state would have to be used for educational purposes or for transportation.
Right.
So for example, all the things we were talking about, schools and the need for this funding and the Student Opportunity Act, this would certainly help
augment that
and help us to deliver on that promise. So,
well.
And one thing I would add, because some people worry that, well, with inflation, eventually more people might be making $1 million, right? And I hope lots of people will earn $1 million a year more. We adjust that $1 million for inflation. So every year, that's going to go up.
Right.
So it will always be only the people who really are super wealthy, that
will
would
be
pay
impacted.
this additional
right.
tax.
And that will be on the ballot.
On the ballot as question number 1.
Question number 1 on November 8th. So don't forget to turn over your ballot.
Yes, right.
Usually that's where it is, on the back
My
side.
wife forgot to do that once.
Oh, yeah.
And she really was upset at herself that she didn't. So yes, make sure you vote. There's 4 ballot questions.
Okay.
So we can talk about the others another time. But question number 1 is the Fair Share Amendment. And personally, I'm very supportive. I'll be voting yes. I hope others will too.
Yes, indeed. And so some of the funding, if that were to pass, would go to transportation. And now, of course, we're at the day that we're doing this is the week that the Orange Line finally reopened. Although there have been some bumps in the road, and there's still plenty of work for the MBTA to do. And certainly when President Biden visited us last week or recently, there was a lot of discussion and hopefully more funding for infrastructure, roads, bridges. Massachusetts is historically behind.
We're old.
We're old. We're old. We're old. We're the oldest. Okay, so you need a little help, right?
A lot of old roads, bridges, and pipes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and rails.
And rails, and of course, in your communities that you represent, such a large portion of the population depends on our public transportation system. So talk to us a little bit, please, about where we are with that. And we've got to make it kind of quick. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's hugely important to our region. I would say it's one of the most important things to the future of the greater Boston region is having a good transportation system, particularly public transit, commuter rail, bus, subway, the Orange Line. So good news is that really under President Biden's leadership, he got Democrats and Republicans in Congress to support a bipartisan infrastructure bill, which we've been talking about for years and years. So that passed, and that's going to provide a lot of money to Massachusetts and other states for transportation, other infrastructure. What we did in July is we passed a state law that is basically going to add state money also to that, and also will put Massachusetts in the best possible position to maximize our share of the federal money, because some of that's going to be through competitive grants.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure we're in the strongest possible position to get every dollar we can.
Right.
So the great news is going forward in the next 5, really 10 years, we'll have significantly more money to do for public transit, including the MBTA, electrify the commuter rail, improve subway service, hopefully more bus service. We'll also be able to rebuild bridges, fix
pedestrian
roads,
bike.
Pedestrian, ped bike, right? More
right.
safe intersections, complete streets.
Right.
There's money for that. Revitalize our downtowns by having safer, wider sidewalks, bump outs to make it safer for pedestrians to cross the street.
We've had a big issue in Melrose in particular, and I think really in many of your communities that the Linfells Parkway goes through. That it's become like a speedway, and so DCR hopefully is going to have some additional funding and some ideas to address that.
That's a great example. That's a road that's
through Stoneham, through Malden, Melrose.
That's a road that needs to be safe, not just for cars, but for children crossing the street going to school.
Biking.
People should be able to
Right.
bike on a road like
Right.
that, a parkway. And
Right.
so this will help to make those necessary changes that we need to make on a lot of our roads
Right.
to make them safer.
One
and
last
easier.
quick thing, green communities, is there funding within that for building green buildings and
Yes.
more climate
Absolutely.
focused?
Yes. When we talk infrastructure now, we're
Right.
not just talking roads, bridges, transit.
Right.
We're also talking climate resilience,
Exactly.
which is basically money to help deal with flooding, to deal with making our infrastructure more resilient. A lot of that also is to enable more electric vehicles, charging stations.
Right.
Also transitioning buildings over to heat pumps. So yes, definitely that's a big part
Reducing
of it
carbon
as well.
footprints.
That's right. To reduce the
Great.
carbon footprint and also, save money for the consumers and businesses, and it's better for our public health as well.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Senator Lewis. This has been the Beacon Hill Update with Senator Jason Lewis of the 5th Middlesex District, who is up for re-election on November 8th. We wish you well. And thank you for your service and all of these important areas to the communities that you serve. We're really grateful for your tenure since 2014 in the legislature and for your accomplishments. I'm
Thank
Mary
you very
Beth.
much.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's a pleasure to be
I'm
with
Mary
you.
Beth McAteer Margolis, and this has been On Main Street at Melrose Mass Television. Thanks for joining us.